She had a one-night stand with a billionaire, then this happened. The title flashed across the screen of Zara's phone as she scrolled through yet another clickbait article. She rolled her eyes and tossed her phone onto the break room couch, returning to her cooling coffee. As if real life worked that way, as if billionaires were just wandering around looking to change ordinary people's lives. 12 hours into a 16-hour shift at Mercy Community Hospital, Zara Matthews had more pressing concerns than fantasy romances. The understaffed emergency department had been slammed since she'd arrived, and her feet were screaming in protest. "Zara, we need you in Bay 3, called her supervisor, poking her head into the break room. "And don't forget you're scheduled for the Charity Gala tonight. The hospital needs all the good PR it can get with these budget cuts looming." Zara suppressed a groan. The gala. She'd completely forgotten she'd volunteered to help serve drinks at the hospital's annual fundraiser. Extra hours meant extra pay, and with her student loans and her mother's medical bills, she couldn't afford to turn down the opportunity. "On my way," she replied, draining the last of her coffee and straightening her scrubs. Just 8 more hours until she could collapse into bed. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom glittered with wealth crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, designer gowns, and bespoke suits. Zara felt painfully out of place in her borrowed black dress and sensible shoes. Even among the other hospital staff working the event, she moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne, smiling politely at guests who barely acknowledged her existence. These people could solve the hospital's funding crisis with the collective value of their watches, she thought bitterly. "Excuse me." The deep voice came from behind her. Zara turned to find herself looking up at a man who seemed deliberately designed to make her feel self-conscious. Tall, with an athletic build evident beneath his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers: strong jawline, piercing gray eyes, and dark hair with just a touch of silver at the temples despite appearing to be only in his mid-30s. "Could I trouble you for a glass?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. "Of course, sir," Zara responded automatically, offering her tray. As he took a glass, their fingers brushed, and Zara felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. Their eyes met, and for a moment, just a moment, the noise of the gala seemed to fade away. "Thank you," he said, his eyes dropping to her name tag, Zara. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious, and she felt heat rising to her cheeks. "You're welcome, Mr. Julian." Julian Thorne. The name tickled something in her memory. Julian Thorne, where had she heard it before? "You're not enjoying yourself," he observed, taking a sip of champagne. Zara startled. "I'm working, sir." "That doesn't mean you can't have opinions," he replied with a small smile. "These events are tedious affairs, aren't they? All this wealth in one room, and somehow they still struggle to direct it where it's most needed." Was he mocking her? Zara couldn't tell, but something in his expression suggested sincerity. "The hospital needs funding," she said carefully. "The children's wing is outdated, and the community clinic might have to close." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "And that matters to you?" "Of course it matters," Zara replied, forgetting her professional demeanor. "People depend on that clinic. Not everyone can afford private healthcare." A slight smile played on Julian's lips. "What would you do if you had the money to fix it?" Zara laughed, surprised by the question. "That's a nice fantasy, but humor me," he insisted, his eyes surprisingly intense. Perhaps it was exhaustion making her reckless, or maybe it was the unusual attention from this striking stranger, but Zara found herself answering honestly. "I'd modernize the clinic, for starters. Add more examination rooms, upgrade the equipment, hire more staff to reduce wait times. Create a proper pediatric area with child life specialists. Expand the mental health services." Her voice grew more animated as she continued. "Implement a sliding scale payment system so nobody gets turned away. Maybe even add a separate urgent care section to take pressure off the ER." Julian was watching her with undisguised interest. "You've given this some thought," he said, and there was no condescension in his tone, only respect. I work there 3 days a week, Zara explained. I see what's needed. Mr. Thorne. A woman in a shimmering gown approached, breaking their unexpected connection. The hospital board is looking for you. Your donation announcement is scheduled in 10 minutes. And suddenly it clicked. Julian Thorne, the tech billionaire. The founder of Thorne Innovations. His company had revolutionized renewable energy storage or something similarly world-changing. Zara had seen his name on the donor list but hadn't connected it to the man standing before her. Of course, Julian replied smoothly to the woman before turning back to Zara. It was a pleasure meeting you, Zara. Perhaps we'll continue our conversation later. As he walked away, Zara stood frozen, mortified that she'd been lecturing one of the wealthiest men in the country about hospital funding. She'd probably sounded naive and idealistic, a nursing staff member with delusions of being a healthcare administrator. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne trays and polite smiles. Julian Thorne donated $5 million to the hospital's general fund, a fact announced to thunderous applause, but Zara didn't speak to him again until the event was winding down. She was gathering empty glasses when he appeared at her side. Would you have dinner with me? He asked without preamble. Zara nearly dropped her tray. I'm sorry. Dinner, Julian repeated. Or a drink, if you prefer. I'd like to continue our conversation from earlier. Her first instinct was to refuse. Men like Julian Thorne didn't ask women like her to dinner without ulterior motives. But something in his direct gaze made her hesitate. My shift ends in 30 minutes, she heard herself saying. Julian smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. I'll wait in the lobby. The hotel bar was nearly empty when they settled into a quiet corner booth. Julian ordered a scotch, Zara chose a glass of wine. You must be exhausted, Julian observed. Working a full hospital shift and then this event. Zara shrugged. I'm used to it. That doesn't make it right, he replied, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. The healthcare system exploits the dedication of people like you. Says the billionaire, Zara responded before she could stop herself. Rather than taking offense, Julian laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made several heads turn in their direction. Fair point, he conceded. Though I like to think I'm not quite the villain you imagine all wealthy people to be. One drink turned into two, and conversation flowed more easily than Zara would have expected. Julian was surprisingly easy to talk to, intelligent, engaged, and genuinely interested in her insights about healthcare. He shared stories of his own unconventional path to success, speaking of failures and setbacks with refreshing honesty. People see the success, he told her, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. They don't see the 3 failed startups, the nights sleeping in my car, or the countless investors who showed me the door. It's hard to feel sorry for you now, Zara teased, emboldened by wine and the intimate atmosphere. I'm not asking for sympathy, Julian replied with a smile that made her pulse quicken. Just understanding that we're not as different as you might think. As the bar began to close, neither seemed ready for the evening to end. When Julian suggested they continue their conversation in his suite, Zara surprised herself by accepting. His suite occupied the entire top floor of the hotel, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city lights. Zara had never seen such luxury. The space was larger than her entire apartment, decorated with understated elegance. They stood side by side at the windows, fresh drinks in hand, looking out at the glittering cityscape. All those lights, Julian said softly. All those lives. It's humbling, isn't it? Do you actually feel humble? Zara asked, genuinely curious. With all your success, your wealth, Julian turned to face her, suddenly serious. Money changes how others see you more than it changes how you see yourself. I'm still the same person who grew up in a small apartment above my grandmother's tailor shop. There was something vulnerable in his admission that touched Zara. Or perhaps it was the way he looked at her, as if really seeing her, not just her appearance but the person beneath. She wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his lips were on hers, hesitant at first, then hungry. Her glass was forgotten as she wrapped her arms around his neck, surrendering to the chemistry that had been building all evening. "Is this a mistake?" she whispered against his mouth. "Only if we pretend it's more than it is," Julian replied, his hands at her waist, waiting for her decision. Zara had never done anything like this, never felt this reckless, this alive. Tomorrow they would return to their separate worlds. But tonight they could share this connection, this unexpected moment of genuine desire. She answered by kissing him again, deeper this time, as they moved together toward the bedroom. Morning light filtered through the partially closed blinds, gradually pulling Zara from deep sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented by the luxurious bedding and unfamiliar surroundings. Then memories of the night flooded back: Julian's touch, his surprising tenderness, the way he'd made her feel both desired and respected. She reached across the king-sized bed, but found only cool sheets. Julian was gone. On the bedside table lay a handwritten note next to a room service tray with coffee, fresh fruit, and pastries. Zara early meeting couldn't be rescheduled. Please stay as long as you wish. The room is yours until tomorrow if you'd like a day of rest. You've earned it. Last night was unexpected and wonderful. Julian. No phone number. No suggestion of seeing each other again. Just as they'd agreed one night, no illusions of more. Zara wasn't sure if she felt relieved or disappointed as she sipped the still warm coffee. The note was considerate, the gesture of the room extension generous. Yet there was an undeniable finality to it that left a hollow feeling in her chest. Don't be ridiculous, she chided herself. What did you expect that a billionaire would want to date a nurse with student debt and a cramped apartment? That was the stuff of ridiculous clickbait articles, not real life. Last night had been a fantasy, a beautiful one, but still just a temporary escape from reality. It was time to return to her world. After a quick shower, Zara dressed in last night's clothes, left the half-eaten breakfast, and headed home. By the time she arrived at her apartment, the entire encounter already felt like a dream. 3 months passed, and Zara had nearly convinced herself that her night with Julian Thorne had been a figment of her imagination. She'd thrown herself back into her work, picking up extra shifts and trying not to think about gray eyes and gentle hands. Then came the announcement that sent shockwaves through Mercy Community Hospital: the building housing their community clinic had been sold. The new owner was planning to convert the space into luxury condominiums, forcing the clinic to close within 90 days. "It's unconscionable," Dr. Rivera, the clinic director, fumed during an emergency staff meeting. "Where will our patients go? The next nearest clinic is already overwhelmed." "Who bought the building?" Zara asked, feeling sick at the thought of the vulnerable families who relied on their services. "Some investment group," Dr. Rivera replied, scanning her notes. "Thorne Holdings, LLC." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. Thorne. It couldn't be a coincidence. After the meeting, she retreated to the break room and did something she'd resisted for months. She searched for information about Julian Thorne. Article after article detailed his business success, his innovative technology, his philanthropic foundation. And yes, his real estate investments, including a recently formed subsidiary focused on urban development. Thorne Holdings. The man who had listened so intently to her passion for community healthcare was the same man forcing the clinic's closure. The bitter irony was almost too much to bear. Without allowing herself to reconsider, Zara found the contact information for Thorne Innovations headquarters and called. "I need to speak with Julian Thorne," she told the receptionist. "Mr. Thorne doesn't take unscheduled calls," came the polite but firm response. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "Tell him it's Zara Matthews from Mercy Community Hospital. About the clinic his company is shutting down." There was a long pause. "One moment, please." To Zara's surprise, she wasn't disconnected. Instead, after several minutes of hold music, a familiar voice came on the line. "Zara," Julian said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" she replied coldly. "I just found out Thorne Holdings purchased our clinic building. The same clinic I told you was vital to the community." There was a pause. "I see. And you've called to ask how you could do this, Zara burst out. You listen to me talk about how important that clinic is, how much people depend on it. Was that all just one foreplay to you? Zara, Julian's voice was measured, careful. I think we should discuss this in person, not over the phone. So you can charm your way out of it. I don't think so. I'll come to you, he offered. The clinic. Tomorrow at 6, after your shift. Just give me a chance to explain. She should refuse. She should hang up and wash her hands of Julian Thorne and his false concern. Fine, she agreed instead. Tomorrow at 6. But I'm not changing my mind about what you're doing. Zara was waiting outside the clinic when a sleek black car pulled up at precisely 6 o'clock. Julian stepped out, dressed more casually than she'd seen him before, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt that somehow still looked expensive. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, he said, his expression unreadable. I'm only here because our patients deserve an advocate, Zara replied stiffly. Even if it won't change anything. Julian nodded toward the clinic doors. May we go inside? I'd like to see the space. Reluctantly, Zara unlocked the doors and led him into the now empty clinic. The last patient had left an hour ago, and the cleaning staff wouldn't arrive until later. Julian walked slowly through the waiting area, examining the worn furniture, the outdated equipment visible through open doors, the children's corner with its meager selection of tattered books. How many patients do you see daily? He asked. Between 60 and 80, Zara answered, watching him warily. More if there's a flu outbreak or similar situation. Julian nodded, continuing his inspection. And the staff? 3 doctors rotating shifts, 5 nurses including me, 2 medical assistants, 1 social worker, and a part-time pharmacist. She crossed her arms. All of whom will need to find new jobs, thanks to you. Julian turned to face her, his expression serious. My grandmother died of a treatable condition because she couldn't afford proper healthcare, he said abruptly. She was the woman who raised me after my parents abandoned me. She worked 16-hour days in her tailor shop to put food on our table, and when she got sick, the system failed her. Zara blinked, taken aback by the sudden personal revelation. I was 19, Julian continued, moving toward the clinic's small pharmacy. Working 2 jobs while trying to finish my first year of college. I couldn't afford her medications. The clinic in our neighborhood had closed the year before budget cuts. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Zara could hear the old pain beneath it. By the time I could get her to a hospital that would treat her without insurance, it was too late. He turned back to Zara, his gray eyes intense. So no, I'm not shutting down this clinic. I bought this building to save it. What? Zara stared at him in confusion. The previous owner was already in negotiations with a developer, Julian explained. I outbid them, yes. But not to build condominiums to prevent that from happening. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded set of architectural plans, spreading them on the reception counter. These are my plans for the space, he said. Double the current square footage by expanding into the vacant lot next door. Modern equipment. Dedicated pediatric wing. Expanded mental health services. He looked up at her. Sound familiar? Zara recognized her own words from the night they'd met, the wishful thinking she'd shared over champagne, and later whispered against his skin. You remembered, she said softly. Every word, Julian confirmed. I've been working on this since that night. The acquisition was complicated, it took time. I didn't contact you because I wanted it to be finalized first. A shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. I wanted to surprise you. By letting everyone think the clinic was closing? Zara asked, still struggling to reconcile this new information with her anger. Julian winced. A miscommunication. The announcement wasn't supposed to happen until after I'd met with Dr. Rivera to explain the transition plan. Someone leaked the sale information without the context. Zara studied the architectural plans, noting the thoughtful layout, the expansion Julian had described. If this was true, why, she asked, looking up at him. Why do all this? Julian hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. Because you were right about what communities need. Because my foundation has been looking for a model clinic to replicate nationally. And, he paused, because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. The admission hung in the air between them. That night meant something to me, Julian continued quietly. I didn't expect it to. I didn't expect you. But I walked away because I didn't think someone like you would want the complications that come with someone like me. You didn't give me the choice, Zara pointed out. I'm giving it to you now, Julian replied. The clinic project will proceed regardless of your answer. This isn't conditional or manipulative. But I'd like you to be part of it professionally, at minimum. Beyond that, he shrugged, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture from such a powerful man. That's entirely up to you. Zara looked from the plans to Julian's face, searching for deception and finding only sincerity. The night they'd shared had been unexpected, two strangers connecting in a moment of genuine chemistry. But this was something else entirely. This was Julian revealing who he truly was beneath the wealth and power. I need time, she said finally. To think about this. All of it. Julian nodded, unsurprised. Take all the time you need. The clinic stays open during renovations. I've arranged for temporary facilities in the building across the street. Dr. Rivera has the details. He carefully folded the plans and handed them to her. When you're ready to talk about any aspect of this, you know how to reach me now. As he turned to leave, Zara called after him. Julian. He paused, looking back. Thank you, she said simply. For remembering. For caring enough to do something. A small smile touched his lips. Some conversations change us, Zara. Ours changed me. 6 months later, Zara stood beside Julian at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly renamed Thorne Community Health Center. The renovation had transformed the space beyond her wildest expectations. State-of-the-art equipment, spacious treatment rooms, a dedicated children's wing with colorful murals and toys. More importantly, the clinic now offered comprehensive services previously unavailable to the community: dental care, vision services, expanded mental health support, and a pharmacy providing medications at cost. No patient was turned away for inability to pay, thanks to the Thorne Foundation's endowment. And this is just the beginning, Julian told the assembled crowd of community members, staff, and press. What we've created here will serve as a model for similar centers across the country. Healthcare shouldn't be a luxury, it should be a right. His hand found Zara's as camera flashes captured the moment. She squeezed it gently, still amazed by the journey that had brought them here. Their relationship had evolved slowly, deliberately. Julian had given her the space she requested, allowing her to process the revelation about the clinic and his intentions. When she finally called him, it was to accept his offer to join the clinic's planning committee, a professional collaboration only, but over weekly meetings, shared lunches, and late-night discussions about healthcare philosophy, their connection had deepened. Julian was not the polished billionaire of their first encounter, or the passionate man of their one night together. He was both of these and more: complicated, driven, sometimes frustrating, often inspiring. 3 months into the clinic project, during a heated debate about resource allocation, Julian had abruptly asked Zara to dinner, not a planning meeting. A date. She'd accepted, and they'd been carefully navigating their personal and professional relationship ever since. You did it, Zara said quietly as they walked through the clinic after the ceremony, her arm linked with his. We did it, Julian corrected. This was your vision as much as mine. A nurse approached with a question about a patient, and Zara stepped away to assist, leaving Julian watching her with undisguised admiration. Later, as they shared a quiet dinner in Julian's penthouse overlooking the city, Zara reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them here. If someone had told me a year ago that a one-night stand with a billionaire would lead to revolutionizing community healthcare, I would have laughed in their face, she said, shaking her head. Julian smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. Life rarely follows the path we expect. Sometimes it offers something better. Sometimes, Zara agreed, returning his smile. Though I'm still not convinced about making our story public for your foundation's fundraising campaign. Only the professional aspects, Julian assured her. Though I must admit, she had a one-night stand with a billionaire then this happened, does have a certain clickbait appeal. Zara laughed, throwing her napkin at him. The moral of that story would be what, exactly? Julian's expression grew thoughtful. That genuine connection can happen in unexpected moments. That listening to someone's passion can change your perspective. That what begins as something seemingly transient can evolve into something transformative. His words touched something deep within her. Their night together had been unplanned, perhaps unwise by conventional standards. Yet it had been the catalyst for something neither of them could have anticipated, a partnership that was improving thousands of lives. I love you, Zara said, the words emerging naturally, without premeditation. Julian's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time either had spoken those words. Then his face softened into a smile of such genuine happiness that Zara felt her heart expand. I love you, too, he replied, his voice steady and certain. Not for what we've built together, but for who you are. The woman who stood up to a billionaire for her patience. The woman who made me want to be worthy of a second chance. As they sat together, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars, Zara thought about how life's most meaningful journeys often begin with a single, unexpected step. Her one night with Julian had been just that, a beginning, not an ending. Not a fairy tale of rescue, but a story of two people discovering they were stronger together than apart. So, Julian asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief and tenderness, what happens next in our story? Zara smiled, raising her glass in a toast. That, she said, is entirely up to us.